Prepare your mind for a deep journey into the mysteries that unfold after we close our eyes in this world, a profound exploration into the enigmatic waiting room of the soul. This is a question that has shadowed humanity since the dawn of thought. What truly happens in the interim between one life and the next? For countless individuals, the promise of reincarnation offers immense solace, a powerful spiritual assurance that every failure can be corrected, every injustice balanced, and every cherished love rediscovered across the vast tapestry of existence. It is the ultimate reassurance of continuity and purpose, an eternal cycle designed for progressive perfection. Yet, even with this hope, a disquieting uncertainty remains. Is the transition instantaneous, a mere flash of light that immediately projects the essence of our being into a fresh, new physical vessel? Or is the reality far more complex, potentially involving centuries of patient, perhaps even agonizing expectation in the spiritual realms as we await the precise ordained moment of return? The foundational work of Allan Kardec, a figure of monumental importance in the history of spiritual philosophy, pierced this veil of mystery. Through meticulous, decades-long communication with elevated spirits, Kardec codified a spiritual doctrine that utterly transforms our perception of life, death, and the crucial waiting period that bridges them. The revelations Kardec brought forth paint a picture of an intensely organized, profoundly purposeful universe where nothing is left to chance and where the duration of the wait for a new incarnation is not arbitrary, but specifically tailored to the unique evolutionary needs, karmic balances, and pre-planned missions of every single soul. We are about to delve into these seminal teachings, moving far beyond simple summaries to uncover the intricate mechanics and the deep individualized factors that govern the soul's return. We will explore why some souls, driven by urgent duties or potent earthly bonds, experience a practically immediate reunion with the physical plane, while others, weighed down by the need for intense purification or the sheer magnitude of their required learning, must endure a profound protracted hiatus that can span millennia. This journey will demand your full attention, as the answers we seek will not only unveil the backstage workings of the spiritual world, but will fundamentally change how you understand your current existence, your past, and the boundless potential of your future. It is a story of divine patience, cosmic justice, and the unwavering promise of eternal progress, narrated directly through the lens of Kardec's profound spiritual doctrine. One of the most foundational and mind-bending concepts revealed through Kardec's rigorous inquiry into the afterlife is the profound distinction between earth time and spiritual time. It is a philosophical and physical reality that the passage of time is perceived and experienced entirely differently by a discarnate spirit compared to a soul encased in the dense, rhythmic flow of a physical body. On earth, we are slaves to the clock. Our lives are segmented by hours, years, and decades, finite measures that carry emotional weight, representing loss, growth, and the relentless march toward the end of a cycle. For the spirit, however, particularly in the higher, more fluidic spheres of the spiritual world, time as a rigid, linear progression ceases to hold the same oppressive authority. What we measure here as a decade, a period filled with tangible events, monumental change, and often acute grief for the departed, may be experienced by a spirit as little more than a fleeting instant, a mere pause in the vast, continuous expanse of their eternal consciousness. This fundamental temporal distortion is the key to understanding the sheer diversity in waiting periods for reincarnation. A spirit that returns to the physical plane a mere 5 years after its death, a period that feels significant and rapid to the grieving family left behind, may have perceived that interval as simply a night of restorative sleep, a brief and necessary moment of rest and preliminary contemplation. This is not a matter of confusion or spiritual error, but a function of the spiritual body, the perispirit, being liberated from the dense material constraints that impose linear time on the physical brain. The teachings explain that the spirit's experience is governed less by a chronological clock and more by its level of focus and activity. A spirit engaged in intense work, profound study, or active service in the spiritual colonies will find the time flowing quickly, its awareness absorbed by purpose. Conversely, a spirit trapped in the lower, denser regions, consumed by remorse, spiritual sloth, or attachment to physical vices, may perceive time as agonizingly slow, each moment stretching into what feels like an eternity of stagnant suffering. This is the spiritual purgatory where time becomes a torment, not due to external punishment, but as a direct result of the spirit's own negative and resistant emotional state. Therefore, the waiting period, whether long or short, is experienced according to the spirit's vibratory frequency and its chosen state of mental engagement. The brevity or length of the wait is an illusion governed by the mind, but the actual duration is always precisely what is required for the spirit's next stage of growth and the alignment of the necessary conditions on earth. The spiritual world, through its fluid and dynamic relationship with time, ensures that every single interval, regardless of its perceived length, is a perfectly purposeful moment in the spirit's unending evolutionary journey. The doctrine codified by Allan Kardec unequivocally dismantles the human assumption that the process of reincarnation follows a simple, universal formula. The spiritual reality is far more intricate. There is no singular rule, no bureaucratic fixed queue, and no standardized timeline for the soul's return. The time a spirit spends in the non-physical realm, the period between the event known as disincarnation and the moment of reincarnation, is fundamentally variable and profoundly individualized. This is a testament to the divine wisdom that governs the universe, ensuring that the process is tailored to the specific, complex, and evolving needs of every single consciousness. The communications received by Kardec from the higher spirits presented an immediate paradox. Some souls, seemingly moments after shedding their physical shell, were already being guided toward a new earthly existence, their return almost shockingly swift. Others, however, spoke of a protracted hiatus, describing lifetimes spent in the spiritual colonies, in contemplation or in active service to those still struggling in the lower spheres, a conscious, deliberate delay that stretched across centuries. This enormous disparity is not a sign of chaos or caprice, but the result of an exquisitely complex spiritual orchestration that prioritizes progress above all else. The waiting period is fundamentally a function of the spirit's moral and intellectual state at the moment of death, coupled with the specific demanding lessons that still await it. For a spirit that departs with a high degree of moral development, having resolved many of its earthly debts and achieved a high level of detachment from the material world, the wait can indeed be minimal. Such a soul is generally unburdened by the need for extensive spiritual convalescence or compulsory purification. It is ready for the next level of experience, and its immediate focus turns to selecting the next, more complex assignment, thus accelerating the process. Conversely, a soul that dies mired in hatred, intellectual ignorance, or paralyzing material attachment requires a profound period of spiritual decontamination. This is not punishment, but a necessary, often self-imposed duration where the spirit must be gently helped to shed the harmful, dense psychic residue clinging to its perispirit. The sheer time required for this thorough, internal renovation can, and often does, extend the waiting period into the distant future. Furthermore, the state of the earth itself plays a role. A spirit with a specific, highly advanced mission, perhaps to introduce a transformative scientific concept or to lead a major humanitarian reform, must often wait until the terrestrial civilization is sufficiently mature to receive and benefit from its contribution. To send a genius inventor or a profound spiritual leader back to an era incapable of understanding their message would render the sacrifice pointless. Thus, the spirit is often held in patient reserve until the precise social and scientific conditions align, demonstrating that the duration of the wait is a meticulously calculated component of the divine plan, proving that for the spirit, every moment, whether resting or returning, is eternally purposeful. The degree of a spirit's moral and intellectual evolution acts as the supreme determinant of its autonomy, and crucially, the timing and circumstances of its next reincarnation. This principle, illuminated throughout the Spirit's book, establishes a clear hierarchy of control tied directly to the soul's achievements across its many lives. Spirits who have successfully conquered base passions, internalized profound moral truths, and dedicated themselves to selfless charity possess a vastly superior control over their destiny, including the moment they choose to re-embark on a physical life. These highly evolved spirits, often referred to as benefactors, guides, or mission-oriented souls, are not subject to the mandatory compulsory returns that govern less developed souls. Their intelligence and purified moral compass grant them a form of spiritual self-determination. They are capable of meticulously planning their next existence, choosing the specific country, family, socio-economic conditions, and even the demanding trials they will face. The decision to return and the timing of that return is primarily guided by a purpose, either to accelerate their own minimal remaining progress or, more often, to fulfill a vast missionary role, to bring light, knowledge, or comfort to their less advanced brethren. They wait precisely as long as the mission requires, demonstrating divine patience and strategic intelligence rather than compulsory necessity. The situation is radically different for souls still residing in the lower echelons of spiritual development, those still strongly bound by material attachments, ignorance, and self-interest. For these spirits, the timing of the return is largely non-optional and dictated by superior impersonal spiritual laws and the guidance of the spiritual hierarchies. Their destiny is constrained by the powerful, inexorable law of necessity and progress. They often await a suitable slot, a specific terrestrial situation that offers the precise, challenging circumstances required to overcome their most dominant vices. For instance, a soul that was obsessively prideful and wealthy in a past life might be assigned a reincarnation into profound humility or poverty, conditions that force the development of compassion and self-reliance. This waiting period is lengthy because the right confluence of factors, the right family, the right social environment, must be meticulously prepared by the spiritual mentors to maximize the spirit's opportunity for forced, necessary learning. Therefore, the duration of the wait is a direct measure of the spirit's freedom. A long wait signifies a soul that must undergo intense, compulsory preparation and must wait for the perfect, demanding environment to be engineered on its behalf. A short planned return, conversely, marks a spirit that is moving under its own evolved will, choosing the time and place of its self-imposed challenges. This fundamental principle underscores the absolute justice of the spiritual process. The more one evolves morally, the more one gains mastery over the relentless rhythm of successive lives, ultimately transitioning from a pupil of the law of reincarnation to an active co-creator of its own eternal destiny. The spiritual doctrine, as presented through Kardec's inquiries, reveals that one of the most compelling and consistent reasons for a rapid, almost immediate return to the physical world is the existence of missions or unfinished duties. This is the mechanism that explains the surprising swiftness of some reincarnations, defying the expectation of a lengthy spiritual retreat. When a spirit departs the physical plane, it is not always a definitive end to a planned cycle. Sometimes it is merely an interruption of a vital, predetermined work. The primary example involves spirits who passed away prematurely, especially those who left while highly engaged in significant charitable, familial, or professional work, leaving behind crucial responsibilities unfulfilled. These are not always spirits of immense moral standing, but souls who had a pressing, immediate purpose. A parent who dies young, leaving minor children, often possesses such a powerful, necessary spiritual bond and a vital duty of care that the spiritual guides will prioritize their return. They may be guided to reincarnate quickly, perhaps as a subsequent sibling, a cousin, or even a grandchild within the same family constellation. This swift return is orchestrated not for the spirit's sole personal progress, but for the continuity of the spiritual links and the fulfillment of the established karmic or moral contracts within that family unit. Their duty, their commitment to love and protection, acts as a powerful magnetic force pulling them back to the earthly domain. Beyond familial bonds, there are the missionary spirits who return quickly by deliberate choice. These are highly evolved souls who choose to incarnate during specific, often challenging historical periods to guide humanity. They are sent with a specific intellectual, moral, or philosophical mandate, such as great scientists, profound moral teachers, or selfless social reformers. Their time in the spiritual plane between missions is spent in brief, intense preparation rather than deep repose, as they are urgently required to carry forward the torch of progress. If their previous mission was unexpectedly cut short, the need to complete the vital work for the benefit of humanity drives a pre-approved, accelerated return. Furthermore, the swiftness of return can be linked to a soul's intense desire for resolution. A spirit that leaves behind a grievous, unresolved conflict, for instance a bitter enmity or a deep injustice it perpetrated, might be permitted a rapid return to face the soul it wronged, often reversing roles to facilitate mutual forgiveness and the necessary atonement. This is a compassionate acceleration of the karmic process, allowing the debt to be addressed promptly and definitively. In all these cases, the brevity of the wait is not random luck, but a carefully managed spiritual concession based on either the strength of love duty or the urgency of the greater collective purpose, proving that the spiritual world places immense value on the continuity of spiritual obligations and the acceleration of progress for all. In stark contrast to the spirits granted an accelerated return, there exists a vast category of souls for whom the interim period between lives is a protracted, necessary phase of intensive spiritual training and convalescence. This extended hiatus, which can stretch into centuries of earth time, is not a penalty but a crucial, individualized preparatory stage. This delay is imposed by the spirit's own spiritual needs and the sheer magnitude of the internal restructuring required before it can safely navigate a new, complex, earthly existence. The primary residents of this extended waiting room are spirits who departed with profound emotional and spiritual deficiencies. These are souls characterized by deeply entrenched vices, paralyzing intellectual ignorance, or a perispirit severely damaged by lifetimes of intense, self-serving actions. Such souls require time, sometimes immense time, to undergo necessary decontamination. Their emotional body is often saturated with dense negative energies, residues of pride, hatred, envy, and obsessive materialism that, if carried immediately into a new incarnation, would not only sabotage their own progress, but potentially wreak havoc on the family they join. The time is utilized for perispiritual detoxification, where the spirit is gently guided to shed these toxic energetic incrustations and restore the luminosity and fluidity of its spiritual body. The wait is also essential for deep, foundational learning. Many souls who fail to embrace intellectual and moral growth while on earth find themselves in a state of profound ignorance upon death. The spiritual plane, particularly the advanced learning colonies described in the literature, becomes a mandatory school. The spirit must commit to fundamental philosophical and moral lessons, gaining the intellectual tools and the ethical compass necessary to make wiser choices in its next life. This education takes time, requiring the soul to intellectually grasp concepts of divine law, justice, and charity that it previously ignored or rejected. It is a period of compulsory study and mental expansion. Furthermore, a long wait is required for spirits carrying complex, overlapping karmic debts. These are souls whose past actions have created deep-seated conflicts with numerous other individuals. Before they can safely re-enter the physical arena, the spiritual guides must wait until the precise constellation of the spirits they owe, or who owe them, is in position for a mutual, necessary re-encounter. The spirit must wait for the necessary rendezvous to be set, where all parties are ready to fulfill their roles in a mutual atonement, whether as parent and child, oppressor and oppressed, or victim and perpetrator. The wait, therefore, is a testament to the divine patience required to meticulously arrange the perfect, high-stakes drama of a new life designed for profound and rapid advancement. The long interim is not a void, but a crucial laboratory where the spirit is meticulously prepared to transform its deepest flaws into its greatest strengths. The spiritual teachings are clear. The primary self-imposed obstacle that actively delays and sometimes indefinitely stalls a spirit's return to the physical cycle is the weight of earthly attachments. These are not mere fond memories, but crippling obsessive psychological anchors that bind the discarnate spirit to the material plane, preventing the necessary mental elevation and detachment required for rebirth. The duration of the wait in these cases is entirely proportional to the time it takes the spirit to willingly break these powerful, self-forged chains. The most common form of this delaying attachment is material obsession. A spirit that lived solely for wealth, power, physical luxury, or sensual pleasure will often refuse to acknowledge its new, non-physical reality. It lingers around its former possessions, its businesses, or its accustomed environments, often attempting to influence or even obsess the living occupants. Such a spirit is trapped in a state of acute confusion and distress, unable to accept that the very things it valued most are now utterly useless to its ethereal state. Its perispirit becomes dense and weighted down by its lower thoughts, making it incompatible with the luminous, elevated spheres where life planning occurs. It is an exile by choice, a self-inflicted spiritual stagnation that can last for centuries until the soul finally, through the patient intervention of spiritual aids, recognizes the vanity of its former pursuits and releases its grip. Another powerful attachment is the paralyzing, self-centered suffering and resistance to the act of disincarnation. This includes souls consumed by profound, unforgiving grief for a person or a life they left behind, or those who resist death due to unfinished revenge or deep-seated resentment. These spirits cling to the lower atmosphere of the earth, often close to their loved ones or their enemies, driven by an unhealthy, obsessive emotional focus. This prevents the spirit from moving into the therapeutic colonies where healing and planning can begin. It is a state of spiritual refusal, where the spirit denies the reality of its freedom and the opportunity for repose, choosing instead to languish in a self-made emotional prison. Furthermore, grave errors and unforgiven resentments act as spiritual chains. The lingering need for vengeance, the bitter hatred against another soul, or the refusal to accept responsibility for past moral failures keeps the spirit's vibratory frequency extremely low. The spirit world cannot and will not guide a vengeful soul immediately back to earth, as its primary purpose would be destructive, violating the sacred law of charity and progress. The spirit must wait until the toxic energy of resentment has been neutralized by self-reflection and the dawning of true repentance, a process that can take a dishearteningly long time, proving that the weight we carry is always the ultimate determinant of the speed of our ascent. For the spirits deemed ready to re-enter the physical cycle, the waiting period transforms into a highly structured, critical phase of planning the next chapter, a process that underscores the profoundly purposeful nature of reincarnation. This period is overseen by spiritual councils and high-ranking mentors who meticulously analyze the spirit's spiritual dossier, a comprehensive record of its moral achievements, persistent flaws, karmic debts, and lessons still requiring mastery. The outcome of this planning dictates the precise moment and the exact circumstances of the spirit's return. The first step in this grand design is the deliberate self-assessment and agreement. Spirits, particularly those of a higher standing, are often brought before a council where they are shown projections, vivid three-dimensional recollections of their past lives and the consequences of their actions. They are not merely told what they need to do. They are made to see and feel the effects of their choices. Based on this sober, illuminating review, the spirit collaborates with the mentors to design the framework of its next life. The spirit, with the wisdom of the spiritual plane, often courageously chooses the most difficult, demanding trials: the specific country, the family, the socio-economic limitations, the physical ailments, or the character challenges that are best suited to burn away its remaining imperfections. The spirit, for instance, that struggled with power might willingly choose an incarnation of poverty and subjugation to learn empathy and humility. The time consumed in this phase is considerable and meticulously spent. It involves finding the perfect terrestrial confluence, the right parents whose own spiritual history and current development can provide the exact emotional and moral landscape for the spirit's planned trials. The spirit with a debt to repay might need to wait until the creditor soul is in the perfect position to receive the needed support or service. The spirit with a physical challenge might need to wait for a family line with a genetic predisposition that can be utilized to facilitate the desired lesson in patience and compassion. The spiritual world, therefore, acts as a sublime strategist, carefully moving the pieces of the terrestrial chessboard to ensure the spirit's return maximizes its opportunity for growth. Furthermore, the planning involves the incorporation of spiritual aids. Before birth, the spirit is often bonded with its guardian angel or spiritual guide, and specific spiritual friends are designated to incarnate nearby to serve as allies, teachers, or even as temporary antagonists whose actions will push the spirit toward its intended lesson. This comprehensive, detailed orchestration ensures that once incarnated, nothing that happens to the individual is truly accidental or purposeless. The long period of planning is the ultimate evidence that every single obstacle, every deep relationship, and every moment of joy or sorrow is a meticulously calculated component of a greater, pre-agreed-upon curriculum designed to accelerate the soul's ascent toward luminous perfection. At the very heart of the spiritual doctrine lies the law of cause and effect, or karma, which acts as a profound regulator of the waiting period for souls who departed with grave moral debts. This principle ensures that the universe maintains perfect equilibrium and that every action, whether good or detrimental, generates a corresponding reaction that the spirit must ultimately encounter and resolve. For those who committed actions that caused widespread, deep or sustained suffering, whether through tyranny, violence, or profound social injustice, the waiting time is inevitably prolonged by the massive requirement for purification and atonement. Kardec's communicators frequently describe the fate of these heavily burdened souls. They often find themselves drawn by the sheer density of their negative vibrations to the lower, denser regions of the spiritual world, not necessarily as a place of external punishment, but as a psychic environment that perfectly mirrors their internal state. These regions, sometimes referred to as shadow colonies or spiritual purgatories, are characterized by intense, self-inflicted suffering. The spirit is constantly exposed to the vivid, painful memory of its past actions, experiencing the emotional and mental anguish it inflicted upon others. It is a period of intense, compulsory introspection where the soul, stripped of its earthly pride, must finally confront the raw truth of its deeds. The duration of the wait in this state is directly proportional to the time required for the spirit to transition from a state of rebellion and denial to one of genuine remorse and repentance. This inner transformation cannot be forced. It must be achieved through the spirit's own free will, often requiring the persistent, patient guidance of compassionate spiritual rescue teams. These teams work for centuries, slowly breaking through the spirit's self-imposed psychic barriers, until the spirit's perispirit is sufficiently cleansed of the heavy, toxic energy of its destructive past. It is utterly unfit for a new, productive life. To allow such a spirit to re-enter a body too soon would be to risk compounding its errors and inflicting further suffering. Only once the spirit has demonstrated true, heartfelt change, a deep willingness to accept its responsibility, and a profound desire to make amends, can the planning for a new life begin. The ensuing incarnation will be one of necessary trials, carefully designed to allow the spirit to experience the very humility, service, or deprivation that it denied others. The law of cause and effect thus governs the wait time, ensuring that the spirit is not released until it is both safe and morally prepared to transform its debt into a catalyst for its final, redemptive progress, proving that the time spent waiting is always the time required for the soul's moral restoration. The spiritual doctrine portrays reincarnation not as a series of isolated, sequential lives, but as a grand, interconnected drama centered around the re-encounter of souls. This principle highlights the immense influence of spiritual ties, the intricate, enduring bonds of love, friendship, or historical conflict, on the timing and circumstances of a spirit's return. Souls are not simply individuals, they are members of spiritual families, destined to weave in and out of each other's lives across successive incarnations, and the waiting period is often modulated by the synchronization required for these essential reunions. Souls bound by deep, purifying love are the most frequent planners of co-reincarnation. They often agree in the spiritual plane to return together, taking on roles that may vary from spouses and siblings to close friends and co-workers. This is done to maximize their mutual growth, strengthen their spiritual affinity, and complete shared missions of service. The timing of their return is thus interlinked. The faster soul must patiently wait until its partner soul is ready to re-embark, or conversely, the slower soul may be gently accelerated to catch up to its waiting companion. The duration of the wait, in this context, becomes an act of selfless love and commitment, where one soul willingly postpones its own immediate progress for the greater good of the spiritual pair or group. Equally influential, and often the cause of a lengthy separation, are the ties of unresolved conflict and enmity. A bitter, protracted dispute from a previous life, where deep emotional wounds were exchanged, necessitates a period of cooling and perspective in the spiritual plane. The spiritual guides will not allow the two antagonist souls to re-meet immediately if their dominant emotion is still hatred. The waiting time becomes a mandatory period for both parties to gain clarity, to understand the other's perspective, and to cultivate a preliminary sense of forgiveness. Only when the danger of escalating the conflict is neutralized and both are ready to accept their part in the past will they be guided to re-encounter each other, often in challenging, role-reversing positions designed to force mutual empathy and final reconciliation. For example, the former oppressor might be born to the former victim, forging a dynamic that compels the learning of compassion and respect. This necessity of synchronization often explains the long waits experienced by spirits who are personally ready but must postpone their return. They are patiently waiting for their designated father, mother, or child, a soul with whom they have a vital karmic contract, to be physically and spiritually ready to assume their role on Earth. The whole cycle is a cosmic dance, where the individual rhythm is constantly adapted to the harmony of the group, ensuring that the spiritual family is perpetually given the best possible chance to evolve together, proving that the time between lives is a dedicated act of celestial choreography, driven by love and mutual necessity. A lesser-known but critical aspect of the interim period is the phenomenon of refusal to reincarnate and the subsequent necessary role of divine intervention by higher spiritual mentors. Even when the perfect plan is laid out, the ideal terrestrial conditions are aligned, and the spirit is declared ready, some souls succumb to a profound, paralyzing fear or a powerful attachment that causes them to resist the call back to the physical body. This self-imposed hesitation can significantly but temporarily extend the waiting period. The reasons for refusal are varied but deeply psychological. The most common is the fear of suffering and failure. The spirit, recalling the intense pain, disappointment, or perceived failure of its previous life, develops a deep-seated apprehension of re-entering the demanding, dense environment of Earth. It views the new planned trials, even though chosen for its benefit, as insurmountable obstacles, preferring the serene, risk-free, contemplative life of the spiritual sphere. Another form of refusal stems from an unhealthy attachment to the spiritual state, where the spirit has become accustomed to the ease of thought communication, the fluidic freedom of movement, and the absence of physical pain. It resists the return to the dense prison of the material body, viewing the physical cycle as a step backward rather than the necessary platform for progressive action. In these instances, the spiritual hierarchy does not resort to coercion or brutal force. Instead, it employs patient, persuasive intervention. High-level mentors, the spirit's own guide or a designated specialist, engage in intensive, loving dialogue with the resistant soul. They use spiritual logic, moral reasoning, and compassionate appeals, reminding the spirit of the sacred imperative of progress and the spiritual crime of sloth. The mentors emphasize that stagnation is the true failure, and that the spiritual plane, while peaceful, offers no equivalent to the intensity of moral education achieved in the physical body. They illuminate the vanity of fear and the necessity of fulfilling the pre-agreed contract, often showing the spirit the immense spiritual benefit it will gain and the positive impact its return will have on its assigned family or mission. If the refusal persists beyond a strategically acceptable point, the mentors may, as a last resort and under the law of necessity, exert a gentle but firm spiritual influence. This is not a violation of free will, but a necessary act of spiritual protection, a benevolent push to ensure the soul does not lose its valuable opportunity for advancement, thus preventing a tragic waste of carefully coordinated resources and delaying its evolution by centuries. The spirit is essentially given a spiritual nudge toward accepting its fate, demonstrating that while free will is paramount, the guiding force of the universe will always ensure that the soul, eventually, fulfills its own highest purpose. The cycle of reincarnation, viewed through the enlightened lens of Allan Kardec's teachings, ceases to be a frightening mystery and reveals itself as the most profound evidence of divine justice, infinite patience, and absolute purpose. The duration of the soul's wait between lives, whether it is swift, a mere season of rest, or a prolonged period of centuries, is neither random nor punitive. It is, in every single case, a meticulously calculated component of the soul's grand, individualized curriculum. The wait is precisely the time required for decontamination from past errors, for the deep absorption of intellectual truths, for the meticulous planning of future trials, or for the perfect synchronization with the spiritual family destined to evolve alongside it. We have seen that the time spent in the spiritual plane is governed not by the rigid ticking of a human clock, but by the spirit's own vibratory frequency and moral readiness. The soul that achieves moral elevation gains autonomy, choosing its own path and accelerating its return, while the soul weighed down by material obsession or unresolved hatred remains tethered to the lower spheres, trapped by its own psychological inertia. The wait, therefore, is always a period of purposeful preparation, a laboratory of self-creation, ensuring that when the spirit does return to the density of the physical world, it is fully equipped, healed, and optimally positioned to maximize its potential for progress. The ultimate lesson imparted by these revelations is that the true power to influence our next incarnation does not reside in the spiritual world's bureaucracy, but absolutely and entirely in the quality of the life we live today. Every act of selfless charity, every victory over a base passion, every moment of genuine forgiveness, and every pursuit of moral and intellectual truth serves as an exponential accelerator of the spirit's progress. It is the only true currency that can shorten the wait, elevate the circumstances of our next life, and ensure that our future destiny is one of purposeful joy and enlightened service. Therefore, to live today with love, purpose, and relentless self-improvement is to actively co-create a future where our return, whenever it may be, is a triumphant and willing step into a higher, more demanding, and ultimately more rewarding phase of our eternal journey toward perfection.